Greetings. In this video, I'd like to share a little bit about some principles of visual design, specifically as they relate to our assignment in Business 310, where you get to design your own personal logo. So I'll say that this assignment tends to be one of the more fun and engaging ones because of its visual dimensions, and also will be appealing to any of you who might think of yourselves as creative or if you have a background in visual art. A couple of details first about what this assignment involves. The basic idea is that you'll have the chance here to create your very own personal brand. This can either be for something that's a little bit abstract or creative, but I know that many of you might already have your own business, or maybe there's a family business that you could design this for and actually make it for something that you would use. Either way is perfectly great for this assignment. There's two general approaches. One is more pictorial and uses images, while the other one focuses more on printed words or language. That's a word mark. And I'll look at some examples of both of those here in just a moment. It'll be important as you do your design work to create both a color version of the logo as well as one that's in grayscale or black and white. And that'll just give you two different options. Depending on the context where you might use the logo, you'll be able to use both of them, but they'll otherwise look the same. And then finally, with your final and revised draft for this assignment, you'll also want to include a short written process memo that just describes the steps that you took as you designed everything and how you did it, and if you made some revisions or changes along the way, what those were. I'll say there's a lot of additional resources loaded up in the Canvas module to help you do this, and I'll talk through a few of those here in just a moment. With this, it can help to look at some examples. So I'll look at some actual corporate examples of logos here, and then at the end of this video, also provide information so that you can see how other students in Business 310 in the last year have approached this assignment. This one is for AT&T. It's a very old business by American standards. The first logo here is from 1889. And if you look at it, you can see a few things. There are some things that remain kind of constant throughout. One thing being the bell shape, at least up until 1969 when the company had some restructuring. The other one that you might notice is the use of color. So starting around that 1969 version, moving forward, they've used this blue and white color scheme. Other than that, you can see how they've done some various modifications along the way. And while you won't have the benefit of revising your design over decades or even hundreds of years in this class, the hope is still that you'll be able to develop a couple of different versions or iterations, try different things out, maybe incorporate feedback, and that way you'll have a couple of different versions of your logo to select from if you want to actually use it. So a couple more here. Shell Oil Company, another very recognizable company. Similar, we can see in their early time, they were basically iconographic, meaning just this image of a shell, a seashell. And they've actually gone back to that now in their more recent version of the logo. But for a period of time, they also included the typography so that this would be a hybrid word mark and icon type of logo. The other kinds of things I would maybe notice, they chose a very bold color scheme using the red and the yellow colors together, but they've remained consistent with that at least since 1948. And then third, another very commonly recognized company, I'm sure we've all seen, Pepsi-Cola, I think is a really good example of a company that has shifted. You can see in the earliest time, back in 1898, being exclusively a word mark, and that actually persisted all the way through up into the 1940s here. So when we're buying Pepsi-Cola, the company brand or logo is actually just the words that say Pepsi-Cola on there. We notice that things actually start to change a little bit as you get what started as a bottle cap, it looks like, and then that's morphed into this circular kind of icon, which as of today, that's really the essence of the logo here. The word mark has fallen off. Once again, fairly consistent color schema. Recently, it's been red, white, and blue, but you can see that it started out as red and white, and some people have maybe theorized the reason why they added the blue was to differentiate themselves from their major competitor Coca-Cola, which is, of course, red and white as well. So just some ideas to kind of get things started, and I'm going to kind of pivot here between these slides and the web pages themselves. All of these are linked in Canva, and I encourage you to explore them if they're helpful to you. This first one is really one of my all-time favorites. It goes by this acronym called Color Crayon Tip, and each of those letters actually stand for something. So I'll take a look at this website here. These are general design principles that apply to visual design. So if you're an artist, you might have seen these before. People that do work in marketing certainly will work with these a lot as well. I try to think of these as variables that you can modify and move around to fit your needs. It's not so much that you're trying to maximize them or minimize all of them, but rather these are just kind of like different ingredients. And as long as you're aware of how you're using them, it allows you to just be a little bit more deliberate in terms of your design choices. So if we look at them here, they give us this visual color crayon tip. It's kind of hard to read because the text is so small, but they spell it out in detail here. Color contrast is just the ways that you really intentionally create difference. So if you're thinking about color contrast, black and white would be a really big difference there. Repetition can work really nicely, and then arrangement, how things are spread out in the space. Are you going for something that's a square? Maybe it's a rectangle. Is it a circular shape? And within the shape, how are you distributing the design pieces? The Y piece here is a little bit unusual, I would say. It's the one that really is maybe provocative and says, what's the point of making it look the way that it is? The others here are a little bit more specific and concrete. How have you organized things? The use of negative space can be very, very valuable. There's a tendency to try to pack in as much information as possible. I'm definitely guilty of that myself. But being aware that intentionally holding empty space can be just as significant and impactful as having the space filled with things. We could spend time talking about typography. Many of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with different types of fonts. You can experiment to see how they look. One thing to think about is legibility and readability. That can sometimes become compromised if you use really creative or flowing or overly elegant fonts that look nice, but the text then dissipates. Some people might say, though, they're trying to create something where the word isn't actually the thing that stands out. They want something that just looks really nice. Icons and photographs are also something you can use. And here in a second, I'll show you a web page that works really well if you want to work with icons here. So that is Color Crayon Tip. The next website I'll talk about briefly is, and there's many websites devoted to this idea of different color combinations. This one's from a couple of years ago, but they basically looked at different color palettes. So either selecting 2 or more colors that they think go well together. And there's a couple of ways that these pairings can be created. The first way and most common one is based on color theory. So if you're familiar with the color wheel, there are actually some principles in physics that can explain why certain colors show up together and tend to look nice together. So for example, orange and blue are going to be complementary and look good together. It also looks just at popularity and trends in terms of design. So here's what this web page looks like. Again, there's lots of web pages out there devoted to this same kind of idea, but they show a little bit about how these color pairings get developed. And you can use this as inspiration if you're thinking about which colors to select for a palette. And then often they'll say that for any particular year, as I said, this one's a couple of years past date, but at least in 21, they thought that these were the really most common or popular color pairings that would go together. And then one more web page to share, and this one is a really wonderful source because it is free. They have lots of content that they are making available to the public for free, and most of them are icons, so like vector art. You can also find photographs there that are free to use, and I think there's 2 good ways to look at this website if you want to use it. Number one, you can look here for inspiration just to get ideas. The other way, more directly, you can copy and use the icons and use them in your logos if you want to do that. And so the noun project looks like this. It's just a search bar. Say you want to look for an apple maybe. It will bring up lots and lots of different varieties, and you can select one that maybe looks good. You can copy it, paste it, and modify it at will. And the final thing I'll share here, this is linked in Canvas, but there is a Google folder that I've put together that includes 5 samples from students in the past year in Business 310 classes with me as they've accomplished this project, and you can just see a little bit about how they've done that. So I won't look through all of them, but you'll see they include both the research memo, or excuse me, the process memo, so how they developed it, along with the color and then also grayscale versions of their designs. So I hope this is helpful, and I look forward to seeing your logos for this assignment.